She had spent her whole life hiding her plus-size body under cheap, oversized clothes, hoping the world would stop looking long enough to stop hurting her. But the day Chicago's most ruthless underworld kingpin discovered what she was hiding, he did not laugh. He did not reject her. He tore away every ugly layer she had used to disappear and made one thing clear: the city would not mock her anymore. It would bow. The November wind off Lake Michigan was brutal, but it was nothing compared to the cold inside Osprey Holdings. On the 42nd floor of a glass tower on Chicago's Magnificent Mile, the company looked like a respected venture capital firm. Clean offices, quiet money, polished smiles. But behind the glass walls, Osprey was something far more dangerous. And the woman everyone treated like a forgettable assistant was about to become the one person no one could afford to underestimate. Unofficially, and known only to a terrified few, it was the primary money laundering front for the Falcone syndicate. Penelope Hayes was one of the few who knew the truth, though she desperately pretended she didn't. At 26, Penelope was a brilliant forensic accountant, a savant with numbers and deeply, painfully insecure. She was a fat woman in a corporate world that prized sleek, manufactured perfection. Weighing 250 pounds with a soft, full belly, wide hips, and heavy thighs, Penelope had spent her entire adult life trying to erase her physical presence. Her wardrobe consisted entirely of men's size 3X sweaters, shapeless gray slacks, and oversized hoodies that drowned her silhouette in a sea of thick, cheap cotton. She believed that if she dressed like a lumpy, invisible shadow, the apex predators around her wouldn't notice her. For 3 years, the strategy had worked. She sat in her dimly lit cubicle, crunching numbers, auditing shell companies, and enduring the sneers of the stiletto-wearing size 0 receptionists. But on a bleak Tuesday afternoon, Penelope's invisibility cloak was ripped away by a spreadsheet. She was running a routine audit on the third quarter acquisitions when she found it. A phantom vendor billing for industrial freight out of a warehouse in Cicero. It wasn't a simple accounting error. Someone was siphoning money, exactly $4.2 million over 8 months, and routing it through a labyrinth of offshore accounts before dropping it into a private trust in the Cayman Islands. Penelope's breath caught in her throat. Her hands shook over the keyboard. The digital signature on the localized transfers belonged to her direct supervisor, a slick, arrogant middle manager named Greg Patterson. Before she could quietly back out of the server and figure out how to resign without getting a bullet in her head, the heavy oak doors of the accounting floor swung open. The ambient chatter of the office instantly died. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Gabriel Falcone had arrived. Gabriel was the head of the Falcone family, a man whose name was whispered with equal parts reverence and terror in the darkest corners of the Midwest. He was 32, 6'3", and possessed a lethal, dark-eyed intensity that made grown men stutter. Dressed in a bespoke charcoal Brioni suit that clung to his broad shoulders, he moved with the predatory grace of a panther. The faint, expensive scent of Tom Ford oud wood preceded him. He wasn't supposed to be here. The boss never visited the civilian offices. Patterson. Gabriel's voice was a low, resonant baritone that carried effortlessly across the silent floor. My office. Now. Greg emerged from his glass suite, his face the color of spoiled milk. Mr. Falcone, we weren't expecting you. Clearly, Gabriel murmured, his dark eyes sweeping over the cubicles. Panic seized Penelope. She knew exactly why Gabriel was here. The syndicate's internal auditors must have caught a whiff of the missing money, but they hadn't found the source. Greg, desperate and cornered, was going to need a scapegoat. 10 minutes later, Penelope's desk phone rang. It was Greg. His voice was a panicked hiss. Get your fat ass into the conference room right now. Bring the Q3 physical ledgers. Penelope swallowed hard, her heart hammering against her ribs. She stood up instinctively, tugging the hem of her massive pill-wearing navy blue sweater down to her mid-thighs, trying to fold her arms over her chest to hide the heavy curve of her breasts. She gathered the thick binders and walked into the glass-walled conference room like a lamb walking to the slaughter. Gabriel Falcone sat at the head of the long mahogany table, exuding quiet, terrifying power. Greg stood beside him, sweating profusely. Mr. Falcone, Greg stammered, pointing a trembling finger at Penelope as she entered. This is Penelope Hayes. She's the junior auditor who handles the Cicero freight accounts. If there's a discrepancy, it's her doing. I've caught her making sloppy errors before. Penelope froze. The sheer audacity of the lie left her breathless. Gabriel slowly turned his gaze to her. Penelope felt pinned like a butterfly under glass. His dark eyes dragged over her oversized, ridiculous outfit. He saw the way she hunched her shoulders, the way she tried to fold herself into a smaller shape. But underneath the terrible clothes, Gabriel's sharp eyes caught the subtle, heavy sway of her hips and the flush of heat on her porcelain cheeks. "Is that true, Miss Hayes?" Gabriel asked softly. His voice sent a strange shiver down her spine. "Did you steal $4 million from me?" Penelope looked at Greg's smug, desperate face. A sudden, uncharacteristic spark of fury ignited in her chest. She was fat. She was anxious. But she was not a thief, and she was certainly not stupid. "No, sir," Penelope said, her voice shaking, but her words clear. She dropped the heavy binders onto the mahogany table with a loud thud. She flipped it open to a tabbed page. The money was routed to a shell company called Apex Logistics. The IP address used to authorize the transfers matches Mr. Patterson's private terminal. Furthermore, the Cayman Trust is registered under the maiden name of Mr. Pimes, Patterson's wife. I found the discrepancy 20 minutes ago. Silence stretched over the room, thick and suffocating. Greg lunged forward, his face purple. "You lying bloated, I'll kill you." Before Greg's hands could even brush Penelope's oversized sweater, Gabriel moved. It was blindingly fast. He grabbed Greg by the back of the neck, slamming his face into the solid mahogany table with a sickening crunch. Greg collapsed to the floor, groaning, his nose shattered. Gabriel didn't even look at the bleeding man at his feet. He pulled a pristine white silk handkerchief from his breast pocket, wiped his knuckles, and looked entirely at Penelope. "You found this 20 minutes ago?" Gabriel asked. "Why, yes," Penelope stammered, shrinking back into her sweater. "And you brought the receipts to prove it while he tried to bury you." Gabriel's lips twitched into a terrifying semblance of a smile. "Pack your desk, Miss Hayes." Penelope's eyes widened in horror. "Are you firing me or killing me?" Gabriel chuckled, a dark, rumbling sound. "Neither. You're too smart to waste in a cubicle. As of today, you work directly for me. You're moving to the Waldorf Astoria estate. You're going to find out if this rat had accomplices." He paused, his eyes narrowing as he took in her baggy, shapeless attire. "And for God's sake, buy some clothes that actually fit you. You look like you're wearing a parachute." Life at Gabriel Falcone's private headquarters on the top floor of the Waldorf Astoria was a masterclass in suffocating luxury. Penelope's new workspace was a sprawling library with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, filled with leather-bound books and million-dollar modern art. Yet, despite her sudden promotion to the syndicate's chief forensic accountant, Penelope refused to shed her armor. If anything, the overwhelming intimidation of being constantly surrounded by Gabriel's lethal, tailored enforcers made her hide even more. She used her massive new salary to buy even larger, more hideous clothing, black canvas dusters, enormous men's tracksuits, and thick turtleneck sweaters that swallowed her chin. Gabriel was infuriated by it. He wasn't disgusted by her body. He was violently offended by her lack of self-worth. Over the past month, Gabriel had found himself increasingly distracted by the brilliant, soft-spoken woman. He caught glimpses of her true shape when she reached for a high shelf, the baggy fabric pulling tight across a plush, heavy bust and a deeply curved waist. He watched the way her plump, pillowy lips chewed on a pen when she was deep in thought. He wanted her, but her absolute determination to treat her body like a shameful secret drove him mad. The breaking point arrived on a Friday night in mid-December. Gabriel had ordered Penelope to accompany him to a high-society charity gala at the Palmer House Hilton. It was a glittering black tie event that served as a cover for a massive underground casino operation in the hotel's sub-basement. Gabriel needed Penelope to audit the cage on the spot, as he suspected the Russian Bratva was washing counterfeit bills through his tables. Penelope had panicked at the dress code. Unable to find a formal gown in her size that didn't make her feel exposed, she had compromised by wearing a deeply unflattering tent-like black velvet with long sleeves and a high neckline. It hung off her shoulders like a heavy drape, completely obscuring her figure. When she walked into the glittering ballroom, trailing a few steps behind Gabriel, she felt the immediate burning stares of the Chicago elite. Gabriel was immediately pulled into a conversation with a local alderman, leaving Penelope hovering near the champagne tower. That was when Isabella arrived. Isabella was a mob princess from a rival family. A stunning, razor-thin woman draped in emerald silk. She had a history with Gabriel and a heart made of pure venom. She spotted Penelope standing awkwardly by the table and zeroed in on her like a shark smelling blood in the water. Well, Isabella purred, stepping into Penelope's personal space. Her eyes raked over the shapeless black velvet tent. I heard Gabriel brought a new pet to the estate, but I didn't realize he was running a charity for the visually offensive. Tell me, did you bring a top to a black tie event, or did you just skin a very large couch? Penelope's face burned hot with deep, paralyzing shame. She looked down at her heavy black shoes, wishing the marble floor would open up and swallow her whole. "Excuse me," she whispered, trying to step away. "Oh, don't run away." Isabella laughed coldly, stepping into her path and deliberately tilting her glass. A wave of dark red Pinot Noir splashed directly across the front of Penelope's velvet dress, staining the fabric and soaking through to her skin. Oops. My hand slipped, though honestly, it's an improvement. Tears stung Penelope's eyes. She clutched the wet, heavy fabric of her dress, pulling it away from her body. The entire ballroom seemed to be staring at her. Suddenly, a large, warm hand wrapped around Penelope's waist. "Isabella." Gabriel's voice was a low, terrifying growl that made the music in the immediate vicinity seem to stop. He stepped up beside Penelope, pulling her flushed, trembling body against his hard side. His dark eyes locked onto Isabella with promises of violence. "If you ever come within 10 feet of my accountant again, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your short life drinking through a straw. Get out of my sight." Isabella blanched, the color draining from her face, and quickly melted into the crowd. Gabriel looked down at Penelope. She was shaking furiously, trying to wipe the wine stain, wrapping her arms tightly around herself to hide the wet fabric that was now clinging to her curves. "Come with me," Gabriel commanded, his voice tight. He bypassed the elevators and dragged her up a private staircase to a VIP suite he kept on the second floor. He slammed and locked the heavy door behind them, plunging the room into quiet isolation, save for the faint bass of the ballroom music below. "Take that wet rag off," Gabriel ordered, pacing the room, running a hand through his dark hair. "You're shivering. I can't," Penelope sobbed, trying to reach the zipper at the back of the heavy dress. Her hands were shaking too badly, and the cheap metal zipper was firmly jammed in the thick velvet. She tugged at it frantically, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It's stuck. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know I'm an embarrassment." "Stop it," Gabriel snapped. He crossed the room in 2 long strides and grabbed her wrists, pulling her hands away from her back. He looked down into her tear-streaked face. The profound self-loathing in her eyes shattered whatever restraint he had left. "You are not an embarrassment," he breathed, his voice suddenly raw. "You are brilliant. You are beautiful. And I am sick to death of watching you treat yourself like garbage." He gripped the collar of the ruined, oversized velvet dress in his large hands. With a sharp, violent yank, Gabriel tore the fabric straight down the seam. The cheap velvet gave way with a loud rip, parting down the middle and falling heavily from her shoulders to pool at her feet. Penelope gasped, crossing her arms over her chest. She stood before the most dangerous man in Chicago, wearing nothing but a black lace bra, high-waisted shaping underwear, and sheer tights. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the disgust. Waiting for the rejection of her thick thighs, her soft belly, the heavy flesh she hated so much. Instead, Gabriel dropped to his knees in front of her. He didn't mock her. He didn't look away. Gently, reverently, he placed his large, warm hands on her wide hips. He pressed a soft, lingering kiss to the bare skin of her plush stomach. Penelope's breath hitched in a loud sob. "Why do you hide this?" Gabriel murmured, his voice thick with unbridled awe. He stood up slowly, his hands trailing up her waist, tracing the deep curve of her ribs before cupping her face. He looked at her not just with desire, but with absolute worship. "You are a goddess, Penelope, and from this night forward, you will never hide in the shadows again." He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. It was midnight, but in Gabriel Falcone's world, time meant nothing. "Get Madame Rossi out of bed," Gabriel barked into the phone. "Bring her to the Palmer House suite. Tell her to bring her finest silk measuring tapes and every sample she has. I need a wardrobe of custom gowns made immediately." "Yes, tonight." He hung up and pulled a heavy cashmere blanket from the sofa, wrapping it gently around Penelope's shoulders. He pulled her against his chest, pressing a fierce kiss to her forehead. But as Penelope melted into his embrace, feeling safe for the first time in her life, Gabriel's phone buzzed again. He checked the encrypted text message and his blood ran cold. It was from his lead investigator. "Boss, we tracked the rest of the embezzled $4.2 million. Greg didn't keep it. It was wired to the Romano family. It's a bounty fund. There's a hit out. Gabriel's grip tightened on Penelope's waist. The message continued. The target isn't you, boss. The contract is on the accountant. They are coming for Penelope. The hot blood turned cold. The Romanos were a vicious syndicate hailing from New York. They rarely accepted murder contracts without an astronomically high payout. $4 million easily summoned their most elite hit squads. But why target Penelope specifically? The terrifying answer struck him. She was the sole person who fully understood the accounts. She knew the hidden offshore routing the Romanos desperately wanted. By successfully killing the brilliant accountant, they destroyed the map. He looked down at Penelope, who was clutching the blanket. Her dark, expressive eyes fearfully searched his tense, handsome face. She immediately sensed the sudden, drastic shift in his demeanor. The gentle lover vanished, replaced by the ruthless apex predator. "Gabriel," she whispered, her sweet voice trembling slightly. "What happened?" "We are leaving the hotel. Right now," Gabriel firmly stated. He quickly grabbed the encrypted radio from the glass table, locked down the building, and completely secure the loading dock. "I want 2 tactical teams ready in exactly 3 minutes. We have a code red." Just as the doors opened, Madame Rossi finally arrived, flanked by 2 massive Mafia enforcers. The famous Italian seamstress carried a heavy stuffed leather bag. "Gabriel, it is past midnight." Madame Rossi squawked very loudly. Then she spotted Penelope shivering softly under the oversized blanket. The eccentric woman looked closely and immediately softened with awe. "Oh, look at those gorgeous proportions. It is a crime." Gabriel drew his custom weapon, racking the cold metal slide. "Measure her quickly," Gabriel commanded loudly. "We are evacuating tonight." Penelope was terrified, but his steady hand completely grounded her. As heavily armed guards secured the perimeter, Rossi moved fast. She dropped the blanket, exposing Penelope in her black undergarments. Penelope bravely did not flinch, finally trusting the dangerous boss. She let the seamstress wrap the yellow measuring tape snugly. It wrapped around her plush bust, narrow waist, wide hips, absolute perfection. Rossi muttered hastily, jotting down the precise numbers. "I will personally craft her a wardrobe fit for royalty. Deliver everything directly to Lake Geneva." Gabriel instructed her sternly. He stripped off his expensive tailored suit jacket without hesitation. He draped it warmly over her bare, softly trembling shoulders. "Let us move." The urgent journey into rural, snowy Wisconsin was a chaotic blur of rapid, tactical, highly evasive maneuvers. The armed convoy utilized 3 heavily armored, identical decoy vehicles. They recklessly wound through desolate back roads until they finally arrived. The fortified stone mansion sat quietly on the freezing lake. For 3 tense, terrifying days, they remained safely locked inside. The outside world was burning as his loyal men fought. They waged a bloody shadow war against dangerous Romano scouts. However, inside the compound, Gabriel created a sanctuary for Penelope. On the chilly 4th morning, a reinforced delivery crate arrived. Inside rested 10 meticulously custom designer, breathtakingly beautiful silk gowns. Penelope stood silently before the enormous mirror in the bedroom. Her breath caught softly in her dry, incredibly nervous throat. She had carefully slipped into a deep burgundy wrap dress. The heavy, luxurious fabric cascaded over her beautiful, thick curves. It cinched tightly at her waist, emphasizing her wide hips. The plunging neckline proudly showcased the soft swell of breasts. The daring slit allowed her to move with elegant grace. It beautifully revealed the thick, powerful shape of her leg. For the first time in 26 years, she smiled. She did not see a fat, entirely invisible, ugly girl. She saw a devastatingly beautiful, incredibly confident, and radiant woman. Gabriel silently entered the bedroom, instantly freezing in his tracks. His dark, dangerous eyes immediately darkened with pure, unfiltered hunger. He walked very slowly toward her across the Persian rug. He stopped closely, his warm hands resting on her hips. "You look," Gabriel murmured deeply, his gravelly voice whispering softly, "exactly as you were always meant to look for me." Penelope happily leaned into his warm, firm touch, heart soaring. "Thank you so much for finally seeing the real me. I will always see you," he promised, kissing her lips. But the serene, romantic moment was instantly and violently shattered. A deafening explosion violently rattled the massive bedroom glass windows. Piercing security alarms suddenly shrieked loudly through the entire mansion. Glowing red emergency lights quickly bathed the room in terror. Gabriel immediately spun around smoothly, pulling his deadly automatic weapon. The radio crackled frantically. "Boss. Perimeter breach at North Gate. It is the Romanos, bringing military-grade, highly destructive explosives. They possess the exact architectural blueprints to the entire compound." Gabriel cursed violently under his breath, his dark eyes furious. The sensitive blueprints were strictly kept safely off the network. There was absolutely only one logical way they obtained them. "We have a dangerous mole," Gabriel snarled, pushing Penelope behind. "Stay incredibly close to me. Do not let go. Ever." The darkened hallway smelled strongly of burning, toxic bullet smoke. Heavy automatic gunfire echoed loudly outside the shattered window panes. Gabriel moved with terrifying, lethal precision, protecting his beautiful accountant. He effortlessly gunned down two heavily armed, charging Romano mercenaries. Penelope bravely clung to him, the rich burgundy silk swirling. Her bare feet moved completely silently on the hardwood floors. They quickly reached the reinforced panic room inside East Wing, but the digital keypad was dead. The power was severed. "Damn it," Gabriel hissed angrily, checking his loaded heavy metal magazine. "We desperately need to quickly reach the subterranean boathouse exit." "Wait," Penelope said loudly, her brilliant analytical mind furiously racing. The old panic that used to completely paralyze her vanished. She noticed the main security terminal faintly flickering on battery. Gabriel, the unknown mold, would not just merely cut power. They would absolutely need to bypass the complex biometric locks. That leaves a highly traceable, totally permanent digital network footprint. "Penelope, there is absolutely no time," Gabriel firmly said back. He fired 2 quick shots down the dark, smoky hall. "Just give me exactly 30 seconds. She loudly, fiercely demanded. She dropped directly to her knees in her beautiful gown. Her thick, gorgeous thighs pressed firmly into the cold floor. She rapidly typed on the glowing terminal, her fingers flying. She absolutely knew exactly how to strictly track authorization codes. Heavy enemy gunfire loudly shattered the plaster directly above them. Gabriel bravely shielded her with his broad, heavily muscular body. "I got it," Penelope happily shouted over the chaotic noise. The lock authorization came directly from a localized internal terminal. "The specific IP address firmly belongs to your second officer. It is Dominic." The strong, angular jaw angrily clenched. Dominic had faithfully been his highly trusted enforcer for years. The shocking betrayal deeply cut him, but he felt nothing. He quickly pulled Penelope firmly up, his dark eyes blazing. "Stay directly behind me," he coldly, calmly, and strictly commanded. They violently fought their bloody way down the grand staircase. The beautiful mansion was now a totally destroyed, smoky war zone. Inside the main foyer, Gabriel suddenly faced the traitorous Dominic. Dominic was firmly pointing an assault rifle at his chest. 4 heavily armed Romano hitmen closely, menacingly flanked his sides. "It is completely over, Gabriel." Dominic cruelly sneered at them. "The Romanos proudly promised me the entire wealthy Chicago territory. Just hand over the fat woman, and you die quickly." Gabriel did not flinch, looking at the man he trusted. He glanced back at Penelope, standing tall in stunning silk. "You should have learned." Gabriel softly said, a demonic smirk. "You never, ever insult the beautiful queen of my city." Before Dominic could ever successfully pull his heavy metal trigger, the reinforced front doors violently exploded completely inward with force. His highly trained backup tactical teams aggressively swarmed the foyer. Gunfire fiercely erupted in a chaotic, blinding, and deadly flash. Gabriel rapidly moved vastly faster than traitorous Dominic could react. He aggressively tackled the awful traitor to the marble floor. He violently drove a tactical knife straight into the shoulder. Within brief seconds, the remaining Romano enemy hitmen were dead. Dominic was loudly screaming in sheer agony beneath his boot. "Take him securely down into the darkest basement," Gabriel ordered. "Make absolutely sure he sadly stays awake for a while." Heavy silence finally fell over the completely ruined smoky estate. Smoke drifted slowly through the completely shattered broken glass windows. Gabriel completely turned around calmly, sheathing his hot, deadly weapon. His expensive custom suit was torn, his strong hands bloody. Penelope stepped bravely over the horrible debris and dead bodies. Her gorgeous burgundy dress was slightly stained with dark soot, but her beautiful, intelligent head was held incredibly proudly high. She did not shrink away from the brutal, necessary violence. She walked straight into the highly protective, warm, muscular arms. He forcefully pulled her tightly against his heavily beating chest. He buried his handsome face deeply inside her soft neck. "Are you hurt at all?" he rasped with deep concern. "No," she whispered sweetly. "I am exactly where I belong." Gabriel gently pulled back, looking deeply into her dark eyes. He saw the fierce fire, intelligence, and breathtaking, undeniable beauty. She had ultimately saved them both using her brilliant mind. He proudly dropped down to one knee amidst the rubble. He looked lovingly up at his curvy, magnificently brilliant accountant. "I tore those baggy clothes away tonight," Gabriel said, his voice carrying through the room. "Because you were hiding the woman this city should have been afraid to underestimate." Penelope stood before him, flushed, trembling, and no longer trying to disappear. "You proved tonight that you were never weak," he continued. "You have the mind of a ruler and the heart of a queen. Marry me, Penelope. Stand beside me. Rule this city with me." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but this time they were not from shame. "Yes," she whispered. Then she kissed him like the life she had been hiding from was finally over. Gabriel had not just protected her. He had shown the entire underworld what they had refused to see. Penelope was not the quiet, curvy woman buried beneath oversized clothes. She was the queen he had chosen, the woman who had earned her crown, and the one Chicago would never dare mock again. If Penelope and Gabriel's dark mafia romance kept you watching, hit like, share this story with someone who loves powerful, curvy heroines, and subscribe for more dangerous love stories filled with betrayal, survival, and queens who rise from the shadows.